Hi everyone, welcome. We're down here in my wormery, preparing to check in on one of my newer systems. They're the worms that used to live in Outdoor Worm Bag version 5.0, and they live right over here in this black tub. It's a 30-day-old system, last checked in on 11 days ago, at which point the worms that live in there were given feeding number 2. And feeding number 2 was just your typical right down the middle, put the food down into a trench. Feeding number 1, the one that came prior, had the food sort of split up in 2 separate locations. So we've had different locations for each feeding. Feeding number 1 was distributed across 2 sides, and feeding number 2 went down the middle. And today, for feeding number 3, I thought we might institute a little something that we do once in a while, which is to feed the system in a rotating fashion, sort of like a pocket feeding pattern. So that's what we're going to start into with this system. Yeah, we're still hanging on to the old piece of plywood that would cover the outside worm bag. The bag is round, so the things that were covering it were round in shape. The other round in shape item that was covering the outdoor worm bag was this piece of paper here. Also kind of round in shape. Kind of cool to see how the worms have come out to bask in this nice piece of paper. Usually, what is that, a slug? I think it is. I think I'm just going to remove this little guy. I don't know how he got in here, but slugs are just something I normally don't see in my systems, and I don't think that they're a good thing, so getting rid of this guy. Alright, well, we'll keep our eyes out. But, I don't know, for some reason it just doesn't seem like the sort of critter that should be in the worm bin. So here, these different things that we're seeing are performing different functions. For me, the coffee filter usually means feeding zone indicator. That's where we last fed. And whenever things like this are holding up good enough to be reused, I'll try to reuse it. So we'll go ahead and we'll keep using this coffee filter in its function as feeding zone indicator. I don't know, as for this top covering piece of newspaper, even last time I do remember the middle of it being kind of far gone. It's just the outer edges of it are seeming to kind of still hold together. Well, this is why I think I just broke it right there. It just tore away. I don't know, maybe it's better used as a bedding for today's feeding. So far, feeding number 1, yeah, what was it? Feeding number 1, I think, see how it's lighter in color out here? We had taken the worms when they were in their original smaller size container and dumped it down the middle, flanked with some pretty fresh bedding material, which later on I think we just attempted to blend in without allowing it to remain as a segmented different batch of material. It was, just meant to eventually all get blended in anyway. So there was lots and lots of bedding applied during the movement of the worms from the small temporary container that they were in into when they were positioned into here. But there's never any harm in giving them even more, right? So let's keep going towards the middle. Look how much more dark it gets over here with the worms focusing their efforts on the foods that we gave them 11 days ago, leaving behind all those beautiful castings everywhere. This looks to me like a somewhat larger piece of cardboard. It looks like a tube, holding up pretty good actually. Where there's one, there could be others. Oh, what do we have here? Another large chunk piece of leftover. There was a piece of mango seed husk I encountered earlier. And some other things that apparently came over with the worms from their old space. I can't remember what we fed them last time, but whatever it was, it seems like they've, for the most part, done away with it. And, as long as we've disrupted so much of the system already, why don't we just press on and do the same. This corner that I'm excavating now, this is actually the corner I believe we're probably going to want to start in, because it'll be easy for me to consider that as the starting position from my point of view. It seems like the first place where one would turn if you were to start from a position dead ahead. So let's proceed with setting up their feeding zone, kind of nudging this stuff over. I've got leftovers. Rather than mixing the leftovers from whenever in with the new feeding that they're getting here today, I'm just going to stick that stuff back out in the middle so it can remain sort of randomly scattered. Corn cob bits and other things. And the only stuff that we're going to put down here is the new feeding, which is going to be cabbage leaves and the stem. This is not cabbage. I believe this might be lettuce. Is that more of the same but really frozen? It looks more like cauliflower. And then banana peel. Now I've got a couple other things here soaking in water. A couple of these little pastry little biscuits. Now they're finally getting so damp that they're breaking apart. They were pretty like rock hard for the most part. So I wanted to make sure that they're damp through and through before they're fed to the worm bins. I've also got this other stuff that was like a batter dough. Sat around for way too long. Figured it was time to just do away with it. So we're gonna recycle. We're gonna just give them this old pile of newspaper, because I do have something that we can replace the top covering newspaper with. So I'll show you that in a moment. Let's just get them their feeding loaded in. Right down there in the corner, pretty generous, I would say. Some of these things like these stems might take a little bit longer, but for the most part everything that I see in here is going to take a little while. You know, we'll continue to see that stem and maybe a little bit of this stem over here too for a while, but for the most part that's a feeding that should go pretty quickly. Let's not forget we wanted to drop in these peculiar little pastries here too, and they might as well just get the water that the stuff was soaking in. And then the other kind of damp stuff, I mean this stuff was pretty dry already, so I soaked it. I just poured a whole bunch of water in there to get it kind of damp, and I've been trying to throw 2 or 3 spoonfuls into pretty much each of my worm bin feedings with the hopes that I can do away with this stuff soon. And you know, let's be generous. Let's give them some grit too. Pretty new bin, 30 days old. Seems like a sensible idea to include a little portion of grit to go with their feeding. Now I'm just sort of picking around for spots where I could clearly see it's a concentration of mostly bedding type materials that we'll cover up the feeding with. Got to admit, what we pulled out of the middle from where the feeding was applied last time, that stuff was quite heavily worked already. Lots and lots of castings piling in there, right? So that is our feeding. We're going to bring back the feeding zone indicator, and it's going to actually serve a little bit better function than my feeding zone indicators usually do, because since I almost always feed down the middle, it does seem a little bit redundant to follow just a set pattern and then still mark where you fed. But it's a little bit of a tradition. But when they're when the feeding zones are positioned, ooh, I just saw another little creepy creature over here on the plastic covering, another little slug, which I'm going to dispose of in the same way as the other one. Oh, where are these guys coming from? I just found another one. Oh, brother. Well, these guys are going to have to get evicted from my wormery. I don't think they belong, but who knows? Maybe there's really no harm in having them around. But you know what? I almost forgot. If I had covered up before remembering, it would have technically been too late to circle back. But this was the feedings, not the feedings on here, the little partition that we had set up in their old castings from their old environment to set all the finished castings to one side in the feeding zone, the horizontal migration feeding zone on another. So I figured it was a fitting thing to reunite the worms with their little old horizontal migration partition wall. So that's it for our feeding, everyone. Now with our 30-day-old system, pretty fun system if you ask me, and at some point we'll just eventually detach it from its old legacy of being, you know, a remnant of the worms that were recruited from outside, from the outdoor worm bag. But for now, I think it's kind of fun just to keep this thing around as a keepsake and reminder as to where these worms came from. But eventually these will just become More worms for the wormery, no regard for where they came from. All right, everyone, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.